The Blue Jackets are icing what could be an NHL roster tonight, but will it be their NHL roster? We find out on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Jay Foster. Going solo here today. Hayden will be back tomorrow. Our schedules are a little bit out of whack this week, but I'm here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked On Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms and also over on YouTube and also on Sirius XM. I also want to remind you guys about our competition that we're doing at the minute. As a thanks for us hitting 500 YouTube subscribers, we are giving away 2 tickets to the November 2nd game against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And all you have to do to enter is email a screenshot that shows that you are subscribed to our YouTube page to lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. And you'll be entered into that. You can find terms and conditions are in the episode description if that's something that you're interested in. So let's talk hockey. The Blue Jackets have a game tonight against the Buffalo Sabres. A disappointing one. Last time on Saturday, leading 3-0, losing 4-3. The Blue Jackets are bringing a similar-ish lineup to the one that they had for that game, but with a few key differences. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today is looking at the lineup. I was like, this could end up being the opening night roster. I don't think it will be, but it definitely could be. They've got 12 NHL forwards. They've got 6 NHL defensemen. They've got goaltenders. We'll talk about the goaltenders in a little bit, but I want to talk about the forward core, especially because they've got their full top 6 here, and then 6 guys who could be in those bottom 6 roles. So we'll start off. They've got Adam Fantilli is going to be playing, Johnny Gaudreau, Patrick Laine, Kirill Marchenko, and Boone Jenner. No Kent Johnson. Oh, no, I lied. Kent Johnson is there. So there's your top 6 right now, which is really fun. Like, that is what I imagine the top 6 is going to be. You can swap Boone Jenner out for Texier. Maybe if you want to put Laine at center, you could, have a Gaudreau, Laine, Marchenko line like they did in St. Louis, which worked really well, and just kick the other team's butt possession-wise. And then your second line of Fantilli with Johnson and Texier, which I think could be a lot of fun. Or if you want to have Boone Jenner at center, you could do Gaudreau, Jenner, Marchenko, which also worked really well last season. And then you can have Fantilli with Laine and Kent Johnson, which I also think will be really fun. So, there's some options there for mixing around the top 6. If you really want to go with the Patrick Laine as center route, you can. I don't necessarily think it is going to be the best thing to do for this team right now, but you have to admit it worked pretty well in the game against St. Louis on Monday night. Yes, Monday night. I've forgotten how time works. It's fine. So that's the top 6. The bottom 6 is going to be some combination of Cole Sillinger, Sean Corrali, Justin Danforth, Boone Jenner or Alexander Texier, Eric Robinson, and Emil Bemstrom. It's not the strongest bottom 6 that I think this roster has, but I think it's guys that are fighting for spots. I'm surprised not to see Carsten Meyer in there because he was really pushing for a spot. But again, looking at this, my inclination is going to be that it'll be Cole Sillinger with probably Emil Bemstrom and Alexander Texier, and then that fourth line of Eric Robinson, Sean Corrali, and Justin Danforth, which I don't dislike as a fourth line. Mixing things up a little bit. Hopefully that fourth line is a little better defensively than they were against St. Louis, because looking at the stats, the other three lines were fine. And then that fourth line was just a possession black hole. So hopefully they figured that out. We'll see. Eric Robertson hasn't had a look in a couple of games. He's maybe playing for his spot right now. I think it's fair to say Sean Crowley is going to be on the opening night roster, and whichever one of Boone Jenner and Alexander Texier is in the bottom six are going to be on the roster. Bemstrom's been pushing. Sillinger, I think, needed to have a bigger camp. I don't think him going down to the AHL is the end of the world. But we'll see. Maybe he has a really good game. Maybe he shows this team that he can be a middle six center option down the road. But that's it for the forwards. There's nothing really exciting and like groundbreaking about it. I am looking forward to seeing how they mix those top six forwards up. I do really want to see a Laine, Fantilli, Johnson line. I think that'll be a lot of fun. Fantilli and Laine have had some good chemistry early, and I think Ken Johnson and Adam Fantilli's skill sets are matched up pretty well. I think that'll be a lot of fun. And then we know that Gaudreau, Jenner, and Marchenko worked. It was good last season. It does still feel like this forward core is being built in pairs. So putting Gaudreau and Marchenko together and then finding them a center, and then Laine and Fantilli together and finding them a winger. So there's some work to be done still, but I am excited about the forward core. The defense core is this again. It could be the opening night roster, frankly. Should it be is another question, but they're going with Andrew Peeke, Zach Werenski, Ivan Provorov, Jake Bean making his preseason debut, Erica Branson, and Damon Severson. So veteran-heavy lineup, which is probably good. Does make me wonder if Peeke and Bean or Boquist is going to get those two extra spots. Presumably, whichever one doesn't will be the seventh defenseman. At this point, my guess is that Jake Bean is going to be that seventh defenseman. If, I still don't know if this is the defense that they're going to roll with. I still think a trade might be coming, but they're trying to figure out who and where and what to get back and things like that. But this could be what the lineup looks like. In terms of pairings, I thought Werenski and Severson was a pretty good pairing against St. Louis, which then leads me to think that it'll probably be Provorov and Peeke, which could be a little bit of a disaster, and then Bean and Gabranson on that bottom pairing. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the defensemen in just a second. But first, I do have to tell you guys all about Indeed, because when you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish that you could do the same thing with your business team? If you're building a roster to win the league, you need Indeed. It's the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. You don't have to spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills. You can just do it all on Indeed. Find top talent with their suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, virtual interviews, and you don't have to wait for results either. Their US data shows that over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor that job. If you invite candidates to apply through Instant Match, they are 3 times more likely to apply to your job than candidates who only see it in search. And as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job description, and you can invite them to apply right away. Join over 3 million businesses worldwide using Indeed to hire great talent fast. They know when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing is not available for everyone. Need to hire, you need Indeed. Let's talk defensemen, because this looks suspiciously like the roster that they could roll into opening night with. There's a couple of names missing. No Adam Boquist, no Nick Blankenberg, no David Jiricek, no Denton Mateychuk, who we're going to talk about in just a minute here. But with Werenski, Provorov, Severson in those top 3 spots, Branson penciled in on that bottom pairing. It really is Peak and Bean's spots to lose. Obviously, this is Jake Bean's preseason debut. He is recovering from, I think, a hip injury or an abductor injury, something in that kind of nebulous between upper and lower body, a middle body injury, I guess, technically. But he will be making his debut. We'll see how he did. Obviously, he missed a ton of time last season, much like Werenski. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him need a couple of games to kind of get back into speed. Werenski has been looking really good out there, but if this is the defense core that they end up rolling into the season with, it's not my optimum defense core, but I think as long as you're limiting the ice time of guys like Peak and Gabranson, I don't hate it. It'll be interesting to say the least. And goaltending, I want to talk about. Elvis is going to be getting the whole game again, I would imagine. He's going to be backed up by Pavel Chayan, who has a brand new number because he clearly didn't get the memo that the Blue Jackets goalies only wear numbers ending in 0. He's going to be wearing number 1 now. Elvis needs to be better than he was in Buffalo. I don't think he was terrible in Buffalo. I know that's maybe a hot take or unpopular opinion. Penalty kill against Buffalo was god awful, needs to be better. 3 power play goals. Provorov and Gabranson on the ice for all 3 of those power play goals. It's not ideal. Looking at who they're icing, I would like to think that Gabranson probably won't be killing as many penalties, if at all. I'd like to think that Werenski, Severson, Provorov, and probably Peak will be doing a bunch of the penalty killing on the back end. They could fix this by taking fewer penalties also, but I'm not convinced. But Elvis needs to be better than he was. A couple of goals there that I think he'd like back, which is a really stupid thing to say because goalies want every goal back, but I think he'd be justified in wanting a couple of them back. And we'll kind of see how it goes. The Blue Jackets picked up Spencer Martin, who has not made an appearance for the Blue Jackets yet. I'm not sure when he will. The Blue Jackets have another game tomorrow, obviously. So maybe we see him take to the ice then. But they need a big game from Elvis right now because I think he has not been very inspiring in preseason. And I know that I've gone on record as saying they don't need Elvis to be a Vezina candidate, but they do need him to be better than an 8.76 or whatever he was last season. And we'll see. I am not as confident as I would like to be, but probably more confident than the average CBJ person. And that's the roster. I think this is a winnable game. I haven't seen the Buffalo roster yet. I imagine it'll be a similar roster to the one that they faced in Buffalo. NHL heavy. Devin Levi was very good for the Sabres. I don't know if they'll play one of their backups, one of their prospects. Who's to say? But this is a pretty good lineup for the Blue Jackets. It's pretty close to the NHL roster that I think they'll start with on October 12th, but with a couple of tweaks that I personally would make. But we'll see. In terms of predictions, I think the Blue Jackets are going to win 4-3. And I think the opening goal is going to be scored by Patrick Laine, which is who I guessed last time and was correct. So we'll see. But that's all for game preview stuff. Next segment, we're going to be talking to a guest. I've got Sebastian High, one half of Locked On NHL Prospects, and I wanted to get a little bit of a deeper dive into Denton Mateychuk, who is still making a case to be in the NHL lineup. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Should he go back to juniors? Should he go back to, should he go to the AHL on a waiver? All of this stuff we talk about. So I'm going to get right into that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, though, I've got to tell you guys about FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers are going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you have to do is place a $5 bet. Whether you win or lose that $5 bet, doesn't matter. You're going to get those $200 in bonus bets. which is pretty cool. If you're thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app's easy to use. You don't have to wait to get paid. There's a wide range of betting options, spreads, player props, over-unders, and even more. The baseball regular season just wrapped up and the playoffs started basically immediately. If you want to put money on that, if you want to put money on the NHL, you can put money on the Blue Jackets winning tonight. You can do all of that at FanDuel.com. Go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. Kick off the NFL season. Get ready for the NHL season, the MLB playoffs. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL, and also us, the Locked On Podcast Network. The Blue Jackets have a lot of rookies, a lot of prospects still kind of hanging around in training camp, in preseason, making decisions difficult for this team. And I thought, why not bring on someone that knows way more about prospects than me? So I've got one half of Locked On NHL Prospects. I've got Sebastian High. And we're going to talk about a couple of the guys that have really impressed me in preseason. And we're also going to talk about one of Sebastian's favorites that the Blue Jackets drafted this past draft. But let's start off with the big guy. I want to talk about Denton Mateychuk because he's a guy that has played in a handful of preseason games so far. And every single time I feel like people are saying, he looks NHL ready. He looks NHL ready. They haven't sent him back to Moose Jaw yet. Obviously, CHL training camps kicked off. And I believe the preseason is happening kind of as we record this. But I wanted to kind of get your take on it because I know Mateychuk was kind of a reach for the Blue Jackets at 12th overall last year. But how do you feel about his ceiling, his potential? Like what's your read on how he's going to do when he finally does turn pro?
I was a pretty big fan of Mateychuk. I think I had him ranked like 8th or 9th overall that year, so he wouldn't have been a reach that much on my board. I think a year later on, he would probably fall down closer to that 15 range on my board in a re-ranking. But I think that he's been progressing quite nicely. It's really just that other guys have leapfrogged him. Like players like Lane Hutson, for instance, would have surpassed him on my board at this point in time. But I think he's developing really quite nicely. With Mateychuk, you're getting a player who is really, really intelligent and super aggressive in the offensive zone. There are very few players that are more natural activators from the blue line or who are more aggressive in terms of activating and pinching up into the offensive zone than Denton Mateychuk. He's a very, very modern defenseman whose game is built on his intelligence, his skill, and his aggression. In the defensive zone, he's pretty standard. He's not necessarily the most stand-out defenseman that will catch your eye on every defensive shift, but he's really intelligent with how he positions himself. He's a very unique style of player because he plays this kind of Rambo-style offense, but backs it up with some pretty solid defensive play that's a lot more subtle in his own zone. And the big question with him is whether the skating can really catch up to the speed of his brain in order to kind of ease that road for him to the NHL to be able to execute these really high-end plays that he's able to do versus junior competition against the best players in the world. So I think that I can see why fans are always very excited in terms of the high-end prospects coming in and making the lineup right from the start. But I mean, Columbus already has guys like David Jiricek that I think are going to be more active pushers for big NHL roles this season than Denton Mateychuk. Mateychuk was a player that a lot of people in the scouting community were a little bit skeptical on as a draft eligible just because of how unique of a profile he is. And that's why some people thought he was a reach at 12th overall because he's a bit of a big swing on upside. The floor is not the highest here. And it's also one of the reasons that I would personally quite like to see him get an entire season in the AHL just to refine his game, just to adapt to pro competition, because this is not a player who's going to outskate or muscle many players in the professional game. And when you don't have either of those two tools that are really an advantage when you're entering the professional level, it can be a bit tough to adapt. And Mateychuk's going to have to learn that, but he's so intelligent. And I'm not really very concerned of him failing to adapt to professional hockey. I just think it's going to take him some time. And I mean, look, if he's able to impress everyone from the get-go in training camp, I've not really been able to watch him much in training camp this year, but if he's able to do that and crack the lineup from the get-go, that's awesome. But I don't think the expectation should be for him to play an extended amount of NHL minutes this season, just because he's a pretty raw player still, especially in terms of how his tools support his overall style. But he's a ton of fun, and I love that Columbus picked him. I think going with him and Jiricek was absolute chaos at the draft in 2022, and I think it's going to go very nicely. This is a great piece. The other thing is, though, Columbus has like 8 defensemen already, and I can't say I overly understood this summer's strategy of going out and acquiring 2 pretty big name top 4 defensemen. You can make your arguments about Ivan Provorov, whether he's actually a top 4 defenseman in terms of ability or not, but he's going to get top 4 minutes. And to me, it seemed like there was such a clear turning of a page with Jiricek and Mateychuk coming in. Same thing with another player we're going to talk about, Stanislav Svozil. But there aren't really these openings for these players to just take off. And I'd much rather see Denton Mateychuk get 20 minutes a night in the AHL and get stunted into a 7th defenseman role in Columbus.
Yeah, 100%. I've kind of been banging the drum on Locked On Blue Jackets for a while now that I don't think you can really overdevelop a defenseman, especially when
they take time.
I believe he's still only 19 years old.
Yeah.
So he's not eligible for the AHL. He's going to be going back to the WHL if he doesn't make the NHL this season.
It's always unfortunate. There's so many prospects where the AHL is like the perfect fit logistically, and it's like, yes, the CHL NHL agreement comes in and butts in and makes everyone's lives miserable because I'm with you. I don't think Mateychuk has very much to learn in Moose Jaw for another season, but the AHL would be ideal. That's unfortunate they didn't hit the age cutoff for that. That sucks.
So that kind of is my next question. Is obviously there's been a lot of talk about Shane Wright getting this waiver to play in the AHL if he doesn't make the NHL. And there's been a couple of guys on Columbus that people are saying, Jarmo Kekalainen might reach out and try to get waivers for Jordan Dumais or Denton Mateychuk. And I was kind of on the boat of send Mateychuk back to juniors. If you have to pick one of them to play in the AHL, I would pick Dumais. Is that kind of where you fall as well? Do you think Dumais could benefit from AHL? Or do you think, like, if you had to pick one, which player would you put in the AHL and which would you send back to juniors?
I'm still definitely a lot higher on Mateychuk than I am on Dumais. I still have a lot of questions with Dumais. But if there's any player that's proven that he's, like, grown out of the CHL, it's Jordan Dumais. Like, I still have a ton of questions on how good he's going to be in the NHL, the hurdles he's going to face on his road to being an impactful player. That's still very murky in my eyes. But he has nothing left to learn in the queue. Like, there's nothing that he can learn there. He's maxed out in that league. And I think with him, you can make a pretty solid argument as well if you're Jarmo Kekalainen to get him out of the queue, right? You can just, like, point to the point totals and you'd be done with it. With Mateychuk, it'd be a lot more difficult to make the same argument that Seattle made for Shane Wright. So I think if one of the two, yes, Dumais, just because another season in the queue would basically just be a flat line for his development, and that could be the end of the line for him in my eyes. Like, I think he needs, like, if any player in the Columbus system needs a jump in competition, it is Jordan Dumais. So yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people like, because he scored 140 points in the queue this year, which is nonsense, just completely bananas point totals. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, well, he's NHL ready," and I don't necessarily agree with that. But to get back to Mateychuk, because otherwise we will talk all day about Dumais as well. The way I see it is, I assume he's going to go back to the WHL. And then he's probably going to do what Stanislav Svozil did last season, which is get a couple of NHL games at the end of this season when Moose Jaw's season is over, and then kind of go from there. But in the future, how do you feel about a Jiricek Mateychuk top pairing for the Blue Jackets? Because I feel pretty good about that.
That'd be chaos. I don't... Ooh... Stylistically, it's not a bad fit. I don't know if I feel comfortable projecting Mateychuk as a number 2. Mm-hmm. I think at this point, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable with him as a number 3. I think if you have a second pairing of Svozil and Mateychuk, you are doing really nicely for yourself. And both of those players have played extended shifts on their offside, so both can play on the right if they need to. And I'm not sure if Mateychuk can leapfrog Zach Werenski in that depth chart. That's kind of my big question here. I think that a Werenski and a Jiricek top pairing is perhaps a little bit more likely if you're looking at Columbus. But there's definitely still that like the Mateychuk's upside still extends to that number 2 like defenseman slot in my eyes. It's more just I think Werenski's already there, and the likelihood that Mateychuk hits that is maybe like a 15-20% in terms of likelihood that he is like that bona fide top pairing guy. And when you're picking 12th overall, you're not really expecting to get a top pairing defenseman out of that draft pick. So I think number 3 is kind of what the expectation internally in Columbus is for him. And that's also kind of where I feel most comfortable landing with him, where he's kind of like your number 3, but maybe your number 2 offensive defenseman, right? Like he gets those second power play minutes for sure. But at 5-on-5, that's a little bit more of a toss-up in my eyes, but it's still a possibility for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I'd rather have guys that are maybe play. So, like, I'd rather have a guy that is a really good third defenseman instead of a guy, that same person, playing as a not very good second defenseman.
Exactly.
Number 2, if that makes
For
sense. I'd
sure.
rather have them overachieving than underachieving.
Yeah.
Because I've just had an entire season of watching the Blue Jackets defensemen like just play above their station because Werenski went down 13 games.
Everyone.
And then it got worse from there, you know?
I mean,
shout out to number 1 defenseman Andrew Peeke for large parts of this NHL season.
I thought you were going to say like Marcus Bjork or Tim Burney or something.
Mm-hmm.
You had so many names in there that were logging pretty big minutes for large portions of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it was real.
Wasn't Bjork on like the first power play for like 20 games or something?
Yep.
Yeah,
it wasn't
ideal. Yeah,
it was such a time to be a Blue Jackets fan. And that's all I've got for today. Tomorrow, Hayden is going to be back. He's going to be recapping tonight's game. He's going to be looking ahead to tomorrow's game against the Washington Capitals, which should be a pretty fun matchup. First game against a Metro opponent since the start of the preseason when they played the Penguins. So that'll be interesting to kind of take the temperature of what the Metro could look like this season. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOB_FORSTER. You can find my guest, Sebastian, over at High_Sebastian on Twitter. Check out his work over at Double Prospects and listen to Locked On NHL Prospects. If Locked On Blue Jackets is your first listen, make Locked On NHL Prospects your second listen. And thank you for making us your first listen. If you did, thank you for being one of our everydayers. We are free and available on all podcast platforms. We're over on YouTube. We're on Sirius XM. You can email us at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter at LO_Bluejackets. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.